Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Vox Vomitus. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of the Kindle Award-winning novel Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series and Pretty Ugly. Joining me today, as always, is my Vox Vomitus vixen, Allison Martine, author of the Bourbon books, which includes Dibs, Since September, and Move On, Melinda. With us today, we have not just one, but two fantastic authors. We have Janina Matthewson and Jeffry Cranor here to talk about their book, You Feel It Just Below the Ribs. And we might also talk about geese and ducks.
Sure.
You don't know. See, now I'm like setting the audience up. So they're like, ooh, I
they
love
should
goose
know by
talk.
now.
That every interview, I'm like, do you have ducks in your yard?
What is your wildlife situation like?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So welcome, Jeffry and Janina, to Vox Vomitus. We'll start with Jeffry first. Jeffry, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll shoot over to Janina.
Sure. I am a writer and podcaster. I live a couple hours north of New York City in the Hudson Valley. I do most of my job is doing podcasting. So I do another podcast. I do a podcast called Welcome to Night Vale with my writing partner Joseph Fink, and Janina and I started working together on a podcast, Within the Wires, another fiction podcast, serial podcast, about 6 years ago. So most of my day-to-day life of doing a job is podcasting and trying to write these books in the spare time. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
As fellow podcasters / writers, we're like, yay, it is a job.
It is a job. Maybe the way they do it, Jen. Maybe the way
I know. I'm like, Vox Vomitus and Welcome to Night Vale, not the same thing.
Not in the same universe.
It's almost not fair to call it a job. It's a really fun thing that I get to do. It's been a hobby for 10 years now, so it's been great to be able to do it and pay rent with it. So that's been really nice. And I live in the woods, and I have deer and ducks and an occasional bear.
I'm like, don't talk about that yet.
Oh,
Jeffrey.
save that gold. I will save that gold.
Save the gold. Yeah. We've got to work up to that. We've got to talk about the book first.
Sure.
And then ducks and geese. Janina.
Yeah,
sorry to transition ducks and geese. Janina?
Yeah, we're closely related. Ducks, geese, and me. I mean, I'm from New Zealand, and all we have is birds, so that's appropriate.
You also have the Lord of the Rings.
I was to say, and hobbits. Do they count as a bird?
We have ducks, geese, and hobbits. That's all we're good
Those
for.
are your exports.
Yeah,
that's actually a great name for a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Continue, Janina.
No, I'm from New Zealand. I live in London now. I've lived here for 10 years. 10 years this year, which is weird. I started writing. I mean, I've always played around in fiction. My background is in theater, and then I started writing novels a few years ago.
Jen.
I had
control my face.
I wrote a novel a few years ago called Of Things Gone Astray. And then Jeffry convinced me to get into podcasting. We started working on Within the Wires, and since then I've written for a few different podcasts, including Murmurs and the Cipher for the BBC, and Passenger List for Radiotopia, and this book that we've just put out, and other books that are yet to be finished, and presumably one day will be. I've no reason to think that they won't.
Just cross your fingers.
Yeah,
it'll happen.
And I'll say, and one of the things, the reason I would also say we are not in the same universe is Welcome to Night Vale and Within the Wires they're like radio dramas in many ways. These are scripted things. They're not just people talking and chatting, which is like, you have writers, you wrote something. We don't write anything. Jen's still like, what do you mean you wrote notes for this? And I only wrote some notes because my brain is so kind of out of my head lately that if I didn't, I'd be like, what are we talking about? And that's not about the book. That's just me. But yeah, that's a very different style of a podcast. And I think when people think podcast, they're like, oh, so you sit and chat. And other people are like, oh, no, you have this whole thing where you did research and you created a story. And that's not what we do.
It does feel sometimes like a weirdly segmented thing where there are like, it feels like there are still an astonishing amount of people out there who are surprised by the concept of like fiction podcasts and audio dramas in this medium, and everyone who knows about them and is involved with them is like,
it's like, huge. It's a huge thing.
Yeah, and there are incredible advocates for it, and like I have friends over here who just I feel like this is slowly degrading their sanity, just the fact that they can't get everyone to listen to fiction podcasts all the time.
Well, I love fiction podcasts, and I do feel like there is like 3 groups of podcasting. There's fiction groups, there's interview groups, and then there's true crime.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
just
I love how they're
separate.
separate.
They're just completely separate.
Their own thing.
They're their own thing. I'm like fringe part of that own thing, so I'm like, I get it. I get
But
that
I'll
there's
say,
like the true crime stuff.
Welcome to Night Vale is one of the first podcasts I heard of that was one like that, which made me think that's what all podcasts were. And when Jen first approached me to do a podcast, it wasn't this one. But again, I thought it was going to be something where we'd have to write. She's like, oh, no, we're going to do this. I'm like, oh, that's very different, because I thought podcasts were all like that. So I guess it all kind of depends on what your first foray or introduction is. And then you get set in that and you're like, nope, it's all got to fit in this one category.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had that same response when Joseph approached me about doing Welcome to Night Vale, like way back when, because I listened to a lot of podcasts like in 2011, but back then it was just most of them were chat shows or journal,
Mhm.
you know, like
journalism.
NPR, BBC, whatever extensions of media.
Yeah.
And
This American Life, the
this-
introductory podcast for
That's right.
all white men.
It's podcasting.
That's right.
for white men.
This American Life and WTF with Mark Maron, of course, and yeah,
Which are both great. That is not a dig.
We're not throwing
Not
it.
a dig. We're not throwing them under the
that's
podcasting
right.
bus.
That's right.
Good podcast.
Or
I've been
any
rewatching
of the ducks.
Superstore, and this feels like those were the first, those are Jonah's podcasts. That's his heart.
That's how he imprinted,
This American
like
Life
a
and
baby
WTF.
goose.
Exactly.
He imprinted on This American Life.
But yeah, I had that same response where I was like, I don't know how this Welcome to Night Vale thing works, because this is not how people do podcasts.
Well, I remember
yeah.
a million years ago, I was in an actual radio drama because I too am a theater person.
Mhm.
And I had a professor who worked for NPR, and he was like, oh, we're doing like a radio drama. And we just need like background actors. And I'm like, do people still listen to radio dramas? But this was a long time ago. It was the early 2000s.
Yeah, that's ancient.
Dang.
Ancient, I know.
Radio
like-
drama has never left the UK. I was only, as an outsider moving here, I was only aware of it as something that you sometimes saw on a TV show where you would see like someone playing around with coconut shells, and that was the joke, is that they were making radio drama
Here
with
comes
all
the
of their
horse.
in-person Foley. And then over here, it's like there is a soap. Have you guys heard of The Archers?
No.
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 The Archers is a radio drama soap opera that has been in the UK for ever and ever and ever. And it plays, I think, every day. And then on Sunday, there's an omnibus where they play the whole week's worth. And British Twitter goes mad when it's on. Like, everyone listens to it, and everyone has always listened to it. And it's not the only radio drama. It's just like the biggest one that cuts through. It's like the Coronation Street of radio. Or the I don't know what the American equivalent would be.
Like
I
General
guess
Hospital?
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't have radio dramas over here to that same extent. And I
Yeah,
think
no,
that-
we don't have them in New Zealand. It's just not really a thing. So it's really interesting, because my intro into radio drama was through podcasts more than radio. And then I've worked in audio drama here, where everyone's background is that they've always been here. We've been listening to The Archers forever. And I'm like, oh, I like my idea of what it can be and what it is so different, because I haven't had that sort of background. It's
I
interesting.
like that you said British Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just like, I got stuck there. I'm like,
Mhm.
British Twitter sounds so much better than just regular Twitter.
Jen,
which
you're
can-
barely on
it
regular Twitter.
isn't.
I know, but every time I go on regular Twitter, I just like look up crimes,
Mm.
which is
Sure.
probably why it seems very negative to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Fair. Well, and I was going to say, so I got into a little bit of a tiff with my husband, because when I told him, because, okay, this is partially Jen's fault, because when she said, oh, we might get this book on the show later, and I was told it's by the Welcome to Night Vale people, and technically one of you is, and one of you is you're part of a different podcast. And so he's like, well, you need to do research, and you need to be looking into all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm not sure it's even related to Welcome to Night Vale. He's like, well, you should look. I'm like, I'd like to read the book first. Well, you should do your I will do it my way. Leave me alone. And then, of course, I get to the end, and the after notes tell us that, yes, this is part of the Within the Wires series, which then, he's like, sorry, and recognizing he had no idea what he was talking about. But I think,
but this is because your husband is a big Welcome to Night Vale fan.
He is, and so he was super excited that it was something that instead of a book that he's like, I'm never going to read that. You can tell me about it, but I'm not going to be listening. He was actually intrigued and was like, so tell me about this book. Oh, you should go do your research. And I would have been researching the wrong fictional universe. So is everything within, this is going to sound silly, within the wires, is it all this kind of found footage or found manuscript way of doing things, or is that unique to this book?
Yeah, it is. The whole, so with for people who don't know the world, basically Within the Wires is an anthology podcast. Every season is a completely different story, but they're all set in the same universe, alternate 20th century, that's had a different history to ours. And the book, You Feel It Just Below the Ribs, is another story set in the same universe, but set completely aside. And the podcast got started, Jeffrey approached me to work, and all that he had at this point was, I want to tell a story via relaxation cassettes.
I love that.
And that sort of is where everything started.
Yeah, so we started doing my notes, by the way, when I have ideas for I want to do something. Like I was looking at my note sheet the other day, and it was just like one of the lines was Tower of Babel, but not. I was like, what am I supposed to do?
Things that only make sense to you.
I have so many things like
and
that,
stop.
and then you come to it later, and you're like, what did I mean by that? And it's maybe a 1 in 10 chance that I actually remember what the heck I was talking about.
That's right.
Like I don't.
Yeah,
do
it's
that.
so
I don't know what the
it's
deal
so
is.
much. Yeah, it's we in each season of the podcast we do another form of found audio. So the second season was told through a decade's worth of museum audio guides, and it kind of tells the story of a missing woman. And then the third season was like 50s and 60s like dictaphone recordings from a bureaucrat to their secretary. And so we just kind of keep playing with that.
To actually transcribe things like that from my past legal days, and going, I would hate that but love it, but also kind of hate it, because I would be like, do I
Would
have
you get
to
like
write this?
PTSD about it?
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh,
start
I've got to take a
going,
memo.
because for people who've done transcription, my foot would be going on the pedal, and I would probably be doing that, like, oh, it went too fast, stop, take your foot off the pedal, like I'm sewing something, like my sanity.
I did transcription many years ago for a theater project, and they'd done a bunch of interviews with people, and then we were transcribing them. This is like prior to decent audio transcription software to get you started. But
Yep.
The thing about transcribing anything that happens on Within the Wires is at least it's all been tailored, and people are speaking in mostly complete sentences. And the thing about transcribing
Over each
actual
other?
talk.
Yes.
Talking over each other. I
Mumbling
do-
incomplete sentences, not real
hard.
words.
Yeah. I worked years ago for a woman who was getting her doctorate, and there were a lot of interviews that I was transcribing, and some of the people had such thick accents that I was just like, I'm going to need a pronunciation guide to even get started, because I got nothing. And I know one of them I had to eventually just go, I can't understand anything he's saying. I can speed it up, I can slow it down, but it is not becoming English. So I give up.
I've had to do, like, not actually writing subtitles, but checking subtitles for people with various Northern English accents. And I keep having to call my partner, who is from Lancashire in the north, through to like just check what they're saying and how you spell it, because it's not a word in any other part of the world. And even he sometimes struggles to figure it out.
Well,
I don't feel like I have a lot to add to this, other than once I played a court stenographer in a play.
This is you.
It literally was. It was like I had 2 lines, and it was a courtroom drama. So the entire show, I was just like,
Whereas
and every once in a while, they'd say, "Repeat that back to me," and I'd have to like,
yeah.
That's all.
Whereas when I was a lawyer, I got yelled at by a lot of court stenographers. Slow down. Okay. And then like a minute or 2 later, would you please slow down? Okay. They didn't like me very much. No, but I was laughing, Janina, that you were talking about the North, because until a friend tweeted it recently, I kind of forget, because we Americans, we forget how kind of segmented the UK can be, and accents different, and just even people groups different, that being from the North was seen as like, oh, this is almost an unrepresented part, like within getting an agent or being published, like, oh, this part isn't represented. I'm like, you guys are all United King. Oh, I guess you're not. But I
no,
laughed as she said from the North, and I'm like, but this is not a Game of Thrones reference, because most of us in America would be like, the North remembers, and that's not what she meant at all.
I mean, they all do. Like Sean Bean is doing a good Yorkshire accent in that, I think. But it's real. The class issues in this country are just, it's a lot, and a lot of like the locational stuff is a huge part of that. Like, it's only really recently, like in the last maybe decade or so, that there have been TV presenters who are allowed to have rural accents. Like, for most of history, you would have to have it trained out of you. You'd be trained to speak an RP, which is sort of like your Downton Abbey posh British round but generic accent.
Random England is what I always called it.
Random fancy England, and random unfancy England is like some sort of vague Cockney.
It's like a chimney sweep.
But yeah, and it's when I went to drama school, and we had it drilled into us that if we had to do an American accent, we could kind of fudge it a little. Like, you could do, like, there are the super specific ones. There's a Brooklyn, there's a Boston, there's a Southern, and there's all of that. And then there's standard American, and it's probably fine. But if you are doing any kind of British accent, you need to know what street you have come from, because it is so, like, the differences are so specific.
Yeah, they're very marked. Yeah,
very marked. It's really, really interesting. And I think it's just because this country is so old, and unlike New Zealand or unlike America, it developed in a time when people didn't leave home. They grew up and they stayed where they were, and they lived and they married and they died. And so you got all these really concentrated bursts of culture that I kind of feel unique now. And I don't know if it will last, because obviously part of a global world is that everyone moves around so much more than they used to. But yeah, there are a lot of wild accents.
I've learned this by watching the Great British Baking Show, that some of the people from Northern England, they subtitle everything, because even nobody can understand them. I'm like, what did she say about the biscuits?
Yeah,
like, I don't even know. But I love it, and then I try, as like a dorky ex-theater performer, try to like do those accents, and then I'm like, nope, that's insulting to everybody.
Yeah,
I'm just doing them in my bedroom.
I was in a production of Jane Eyre once, and it took me basically until production week to really feel like I could do anything resembling the Yorkshire accent I was supposed to have perfect. They're all hard, and they're all like, you've got to be accurate. It's stressful.
Well, and I think the first time I kind of learned that the accents would vary, as I was remembering reading some notes for the production of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that
we're not judging you.
No, we're not. But that the man who played Spike, James Marsters, who is an American, was being taught by Anthony Stewart Head how to sound by sounding like how Anthony Stewart Head really talks, because how Anthony Stewart Head was on the show was not how he really talks, because he was told not to use that accent because it wasn't like seen as academic or anything enough. So he needed to take on a fancier accent. But of course, the guy who's playing the Billy Idol wannabe could sound like that. So I'm like, that's fascinating.
I think that was also going on with, I don't know if you guys watched Preacher.
Yes.
I had. I'd seen, I think, part of the first season. I'm so far behind on so much of my TV.
I read the graphic novels.
Yeah.
Such a
the guy who plays
dork.
Cassidy is English. And then Ruth Nager, who plays someone from Texas, is Irish.
Yeah.
So he was playing Irish and she was playing American. And yeah, I think a similar thing was happening there.
So I have to ask, you are in London, formerly from New Zealand. Jeffrey, you're in the United States. How did your creative partnership start? How did you guys meet? Was it just like, how did this happen? Because obviously you've developed an incredible working relationship.
Tinder for podcasters.
Yeah, it was Twitter stalking, basically. It was
that's how we get most of our guests.
I did. Janina wrote this book here called "Of Things Gone Astray" back in 2015. No, when did you write this?
Isn't it a great cover? I'm
That's
still
great.
Beautiful cover.
It's so long now, and I still get like shivers about that cover.
I was in Amherst, Massachusetts at a little indie bookstore, and it was sitting out and, on the staff recommends table. And I was like, cool cover. And I just read the first few pages and was like, this sounds awesome. I'll just buy it. And we were leaving on tour soon after that for Night Vale for live show tours, and I just read it in the tour van over the next week or two, and yeah, I really liked it, and
then
I
the
tweeted,
stalking began.
yeah, well,
After
it was
that?
kind of one of those things where I was like, this is really great, and I tweeted a photo of me reading it, and I had this like, somebody on the tour had given me this like handmade like little lace bookmark that with the Night Vale logo on it. So I had that in the book. I tweeted it, and Janina saw it through. I think your partner Jamie
My
pointed
my
it out
younger
to you.
sister saw
Oh,
it on your Tumblr, I think, and
that's it.
and texted me and was like,
Tumblr.
"This is wild. Have you seen this?" And I was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing!" And then we followed each other on Twitter, and
And
we're
I
like,
usually follow people if I read their book and it's like, oh, I like this book, and I'll just go find them on Twitter and follow them. And Janina and I started talking through that, and then when I realized she lived in London, we came later that year to London to do a show, so I invited her, and she seemed like a really like a very easy person to talk to, like not a slasher killer at all.
Yeah,
And
Not even a
she
little.
passed the like, oh, is this person a psycho?
yeah, and so yeah, and she obviously writes really well, and I was just wanting to get Within the Wires off the ground, so, and I really wanted somebody else to work with, so yeah, so I just asked her, and she was like, sure.
Oh my gosh, I
That was
love
easy.
that.
Yeah.
That's a much fancier way of meeting each other. When Allison and I met, I pitched her an Adam Driver based podcast where we were just going to rewatch all of Girls, but pretend every episode starred just Adam Driver.
I mean, right now we just send each other Adam Driver memes all the time, so it's kind of the same thing.
Basically, it's the same meet cute story that you guys have.
yeah, basically, it's exactly
Basically the same.
Except they've actually gotten to meet Jen, and they were on different continents. What's our excuse?
I will be in California in January.
You live in San Francisco. I'm in Orange. That's like, it might as well still be a different state.
I know. I live in New England, so like all of our states are just so close to each other that like,
Yeah,
You
as
do not
opposed
understand
to
how big California is.
as
Well,
opposed
I
to
know,
like
every-
getting to Orange County from like Santa Monica is like driving from Maine to New York.
Don't bring that up. I was just there. That's where my dad lives in Culver City, bordering on Santa Monica. And
Okay.
even just doing that for Thanksgiving part due on Sunday was just like, why are our freeways?
Why are cars?
Why are cars?
Freeways?
Can't we just zap ourselves there?
Yeah,
Mhm.
my sister lived just by Paramount Studios, and then she moved to Texas. So I'm like, I don't have to drive to LA anymore, although I don't get to see her anymore. And then he went and moved to LA from Anaheim. I'm like, what are you guys doing to me? Why? Sorry, I'll stop complaining about the traffic down here. I'm sure you have nothing like Janina's like, we don't even have cars in London. Just kidding.
Oh, traffic is so bad in London that I'm terrified of the idea of ever driving here.
Yeah, just don't. Just don't.
No.
No, driving is just terrifying no matter where you are because sometimes
mean,
there's snow.
I
and
love
animals.
driving, and I miss driving. I miss living in a city where it makes sense to drive because Christchurch is like small and flat, and the public transport isn't great. So like you drive everywhere, and I miss that freedom because now I have to like check train times and hope that nothing is delayed and stand near strangers who are refusing to wear masks. And I just would much rather just
It's
be in my
easier
own
to
little
not
bubble.
leave your
Roll up
home.
your window.
And I'm just like, just be a shut-in.
That's you, Jen. It's like, I'm never leaving my house.
You know? You can do what I did and just like move to rural New England.
Yes, but then
rural
when you need
someplace.
when you need to go places and it's supposed to rain, it ends up snowing and it goes badly for you. So
It did. We were stuck in a ditch in 2 inches of snow. Thank you very much, people.
Oh my goodness. 2
2 inches. We didn't get our snow tires yet. For everybody who's watching this now, people are like, oh, okay, Jennifer, I see. You've lived in New England almost your entire life. You should know better. No, I don't learn.
I swear I had like 4 pages of notes on this book. At some point I have questions about it, but then we just keep talking about other stuff. But
So I will say about this book, I read part of it out loud to my husband and wept openly. It was astounding. It was gorgeous prose, hard to read on just a fundamental level.
Not on a difficult.
Not in a difficult.
Like, oh, the mechanics of the sentence are
the
problematic.
words are hard,
Like
and I don't understand what's happening. No, not like
none
that.
of
Like emotionally, it was hard to read, and I love. I look for that in a book. Like I want to be devastated when it's done, and devastated throughout.
So, mission accomplished.
So thank you for creating like a 40-year apocalypse in your world that I got to like vicariously live through.
Well, thank you. That's very, very nice. of you
You're
to
like,
say.
that's nice.
Was
It
that
is
a
a
compliment?
compliment.
That feels
It
great.
is. It is a compliment.
In our
If-
book, it's a compliment.
yeah.
It's
That's
fun to work in an industry where it's a compliment when someone comes up to you and says, "You broke my heart."
I know. Or like,
You're welcome.
your book made me want to kill myself. And I'm like, but and then they go, in a good way. I'm
Oh,
like,
in a good way.
okay, I just don't want to be sued by your family at some point in time.
Well, I think one of the things that I just really loved about this book is it was both a commentary on and the found manuscript. So half my notes are actually from the footnotes, because for anybody who hasn't read it, this is this found manuscript of this person who they're like, oh, she was this person who was important in this society in this way. Okay, Jen is giving us demonstration.
And
Do
there's
not be scared of
footnotes?
Yeah.
Yeah, do not be scared of the footnotes, because they're not any harder to read, but it's also like whoever is publishing the book, it's like the publisher is a character in the book, which was a really interesting way to, I don't think I've ever read something like that, where it's like the publisher is a character and commenting on whether or not they even should have published the book.
And whether what they're even publishing is valid or
Yeah.
true,
Mm-hmm.
and why people should be reading it and why they shouldn't be reading it, which was just so cool. Like the whole way through, I was like, ah.
It was really fun when we started talking about making the book. It was Janina, talked about this idea of like having this like meta narrator that's, kind of introducing the book, footnoting it. And I thought that was pretty cool. And then once I kind of sort of saw how she started writing out the intro and the first footnotes and kind of laid down the first track, basically, I was like, oh, now I get this beat. I get this. This
I was
is really
wondering
cool.
if there was one person in charge of footnotes.
I would definitely say Janina was in charge of footnotes.
She is queen of footnotes.
Janina's like, yeah, that was me.
Mhm. Yeah,
I was a bit worried that Jeffrey was just indulging me for a while.
And then it would be published and the
really
footnotes wouldn't be
insistent.
there at all.
Oh,
That's weird.
More that I thought he was secretly like, I'm not sure, and I'm
Like,
just,
sure, footnotes sound
but
great,
I can be a bit of a steamroller sometimes. And I was pretty insistent about them.
We will have footnotes.
They're really
Footnotes are
great.
happening.
It's one of those things that I think is difficult to explain. Like when you see something in your mind and you feel like you know how it's going to work, but it's difficult to explain to someone else without just doing it. So when we wrote like the first 5-ish, 6 maybe chapters for the proposal with the first section of footnotes, and once we had that much of the book done, I think it was a lot clearer what I had been thinking,
why you want
and trying and failing to communicate.
You're like, trust me, it'll be good. It's just a thing, like the feel, the whole bit of it. Oh, okay.
And
sure.
oddly, for proposals, they need more than that. Go figure.
Yeah, I know.
I wish you could just like tell them your feelings about your ideas, and they would go.
I think you can when you're Stephen King. So
Yeah, I was gonna say once you get to a
that
certain point, you go.
then-
I've just got this idea where it's the Tower of Babel without the Babel.
Yeah.
don't,
And then they
don't worry
go,
about it.
Perfect.
And 20 minutes later, you check your bank account and you see the deposit for your advance.
And then you're like, how do I make this a book?
Yeah, I think Stephen King just has a private email address that when he's done writing his book, he just sends it and it automatically goes to press.
Yeah.
He's at that status
Let
now.
me
Where
explain a few of the things I've read.
Yeah.
It's okay to make that face for people just watching listening to the audio. Allison made like one of those emoji faces, which was like, and I'm just going to make the face too, and you're not going to know it. It's like that.
It's a grimace a little bit,
Mhm.
and not
It's a
the purple
grimace
guy
smile.
from McDonald's, like the actual grimace. And there was one with an alligator. I'm still not really.
Look,
sure
he's
what
written
it
like 1,000 books. They can't all
is.
be good.
I got them. It was one where it was a short story set, and I didn't realize that. So it was 2 short stories or mini novellas. I'm not really sure, because when you listen to it, it's sometimes hard to gauge how long they actually would have been. But one involved like an alligator or a crocodile, and I'm still kind of confused by that one. So it's all right. He trained a dog, and there was an alligator.
Mhm.
Kind of thing that probably wouldn't get picked up in Pit Mad for everybody who's pitching tomorrow. Good luck, guys.
Oh God, tomorrow's Pit Mad. Good luck, everyone
Yeah.
who's watching this live.
Yeah.
Oh,
But again, one of those concepts where when you're Stephen King, you can get away with it, and the rest of
Yeah.
us are like,
you can say an
Probably need
alligator
somewhere there.
homeschools his kids, and then
that's a picture book, Jen.
Okay.
or is it? Who knows? If you're Stephen King, you can make it into anything.
Well, and one of the things that I loved about this book, as far as like this whole idea of it's this found manuscript and there's this society, and through this you're introducing the reader, like those of us who knew nothing about Within the Wires, we're learning about the society almost in this backwards way of this is how it is now, and of course you're used to how it is now, but as the reader we aren't. But they're taking it under like supposition that we did know how it was, because the reader isn't really supposed to be us, but readers in this society. So it was all these kind of meta ideas that I just loved. And I loved reading that, because then it really felt like I was in the society. And I don't think I've ever read a book where I'm like, I feel like I'm part of this different audience that I'm not really part of. I don't know if any of that made sense. It makes sense in my head.
No, it does. And like, great. That's great news, because that's
what
I
you're
guess.
going for.
Yeah, and it is difficult, I think, because we're writing in a world that is established for some people, but not at all for others.
Right.
You want to be able to balance that, where it's not going to be alienating for people who haven't listened to the podcast, and it's not going to be like babyish for people who have, where
we're like, come on, we know this.
Yeah, you did a really
on.
good job of not dumbing anything down, but making it very accessible. And I will say the moment that I knew I was completely hooked into the world was in a footnote when it just said former United States. And just that made me go, I'm there. Like whatever's happening, like I see it, because it's early on. It's like an early footnote where it's just like a throwaway line, former United, blah, 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 former United States. And I'm like,
what happened to us?
What's going on? And then later on, there's like former Canada. And I'm like,
happening.
I love it.
Well, and I know that for me, part of it also, at the very beginning, when I was still kind of putting the picture together of the society, I was doing these little comparison notes of, okay, if it was around this time, what was happening in ours, and what was that point of divergence, and where did our society veer from their society, like how far back would we have had to go to find that commonality where they veered onto their timeline and we veered onto ours. And
I was trying to figure that
out.
out too.
Were we to something like that? And there wasn't any one little thing, but the further I got along, I stopped caring about that, and I was just completely engrossed in this thing. And so I don't know how much you want us to talk about some of the things that happen, like the age 10 protocols. Like, I don't want to say some of that stuff, but I will say I'm going to blame Jen, because she's done a lot of our, I'm blaming you, because you're the one who usually finds our guests. We
I'm
read
like,
a book not that long ago that I also loved, Monica Burns' The Actual Star. Nothing like your book in 99% of ways, but culturally there was a similar phenomena going on here. And I'm what are you people all doing to us, where society is basically being told to change a very fundamental part of not just how current society is, but basically society from its inception when we were cave people on, as far as how interpersonal dynamics work. I'll say no more. You guys probably know what I'm talking about. People listening might be like,
like, what is happening?
It's Coca-Cola, I swear.
The audience is thinking, weren't we supposed to talk about geese?
There was a bear in there. It symbolizes Mother Russia. Russia has nothing to do with this book.
We had this kind of like one of the basic tenets of this like new society that forms out of the Great Reckoning, which, as you mentioned, Allison, like there's no like single point in which the timeline veers off from our actual 20th century real world timeline. We didn't want to focus on one event, like what if World War I happened differently, or what if it didn't happen? We didn't want to do like that.
And there was a plague on top of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you had a lot of like things happening kind of at the same time. It was like there were wars, there were natural disasters, there was
a volcano.
There was a big flu. That there was so many things that just kind of mingled together to create this 40 years of
awful.
Yeah, of decimating like the world population, basically, and people having to start over and start over from scratch. And I think so much of the book deals with it deals pretty directly with the two narrators, with like how valid memory is and what truth is, because you have two different competing unreliable narrators. But I think it also deals with like like how far we're willing to go to reestablish our lives, and the without getting too much into like the specific plots of the book, but there there are some like fundamental changes to how humanity lives its life, and part of that comes through people willingly subscribing to a new society, a new way of living, simply so that they can build their world back together. And Miriam, our narrator, sort of develops a process that gets used to help this along, and it begs the question of like how much
I was going to start shouting.
Yeah.
But I know Janina has her headphones on 4, so it would be fine if I was like, well, I feel like she had good intentions.
Yeah, and good intentions versus bad use too,
Yes.
those things too.
I feel like a lot of this book very much kind of parallels things that we are going through / not going through right now, or feeling and not feeling about the world we live in. Obviously, we're all living in a COVID world right now. So we have like this strange affinity for what if the world ends? What would we do?
Mm-hmm.
Like we've all in the past 2 years had these thoughts of like, what is happening to us? And I feel like you both created like this amazing world and this amazing novel that explores some of the darker and the lighter aspects of that, because there is joy in this book.
Yeah.
and love, and it made me really miss Europe. I'll say that. Just being able to go places, even though they in your world decimated by bombs and
sure
natural
Jen wants to
disasters.
go find some bombed out farmhouse and just hang out.
I really did want to do that. Like my love of abandoned buildings and Europe made me go, kind of my dream vacation.
Yeah,
that
grow
she's on right
potatoes.
now.
Yeah, in rural Belgium. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I had a question, and again, I have no idea if this was intentional or if this was one of those things where you were just supposed to let the reader make of it what they will. But the predominance of female characters in this, and that how that factored into some of the changes in society, was that an intentional thing, or was that just we like this character and she is that way, and it just so happens that that's how you wrote the characters, or was that an intentional societal change? Because I'm trying to think, there were maybe 2, 3, maybe 3 men in the whole book.
But I mean, didn't a lot of them die in war?
Well, yes.
Yeah, I think probably a little women died too. I think they started churning through male soldiers fast enough to start having women out there too. I think
I shouldn't have laughed at that. I'm sorry.
No,
that was terrible.
These are fictional men and women. It's okay that they died.
They're fictionally dead.
Yeah, it's fine that they're dead.
Fictional casualties. That's my band.
We have, from the start of the podcast, just urged towards mainly women, or at least not cis men. One of our lead characters is a trans man in the podcast, but the only cis man who features is in our Patreon only season, which Jeffry performs, and that's just because we wanted Jeffry to perform it.
We need Jeffry to do something.
Yeah, it's hard to hire an actor for the Patreon. It's easier if we can just do everything ourselves.
Yeah. Like, do you want to get paid nothing but make us a little bit of money?
But yeah, I think when we first started, Jeffry coming off Welcome to Night Vale, which centers around Cecil and to a lesser extent Carlos, and he was like, I've been writing about a man for a while, maybe we should center this around women, and which I was totally on board with. So we've always just kept things a little bit female centric, which
I really loved. Like, to me, I was just like, oh, it's just so great to like read all of these incredibly powerful women. I loved that sexuality wasn't even like, I don't want to say it didn't play a part in it. It was just like, given that you just like are with people.
Yeah, well, I think
there was no like, I'm a lesbian scientist.
Yeah,
so that was the original title of the novel.
The original title of You Feel It Just Below the Ribs was I'm a lesbian scientist! ! And it was a musical. Little known fact.
It was a big tap number, but we had to cut
it.
Yeah, 12 out of 10 would seem. But yeah, I think there's like the two stories there, which is the story of like us as writers, where like we want to write about a world where there are lots of women being great and where there's not super huge amounts of bigotry towards queer people, people of color, or anything. And then there's the world of the universe, which is there was a massive cultural reset, and everyone kind of started from scratch. And because that starting from scratch involved deliberately dismantling the idea of a family unit, the patriarchy became a less dominant thing. So it's just, this is it's not a there's a lot wrong with this world. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there that is
that's not great.
This
not
is
ideal.
not a utopia.
But
No,
there are
not at all.
moments that you think, even like when you're reading those footnotes, at least I did, I was like, that could have been a perfect world.
But so could ours, and I think
I
that's
know.
the point. And I think that that's what we sort of arrived at. Like, we didn't set out to write dystopian fiction. We didn't set out to write utopian fiction. But depending on what part of this world a particular story zeroes in on, it can seem like either of those things. And I think that is true of the real world too. Like, there's definitely people who are living in essentially in utopias, and there's a huge amount of people who are absolutely not.
Who we are not. We're like, maybe eventually, if we can get some things straightened out, we might get to that. But right now, not so much.
Yeah, it's nice to think that it's possible that we could.
Yeah.
We strive for that.
Yeah.
So okay, so these books, this is the first book that's been written in this universe?
Yeah.
This is the first book.
Are there more coming? Are you working on more for us?
If they want us to do another, we would be delighted to do another. We don't have a specific idea for one yet. We haven't talked that through yet.
Tower of Babel, but not Babel.
Yep.
Tower of Babel, but not. Yeah. But yeah, we still really like telling stories in this world, so we're definitely open to doing more.
Yeah. It's really fun to sit because the great conceit about Within the Wires that I've really enjoyed. I enjoy writing Night Vale and the Night Vale novels as well too. And one of the big difference is that, you know, when we write a Welcome to Night Vale novel, the show's been going on 10 years and we have a whole cast of characters that are constantly growing and changing. And so you kind of already know who those people are. So if I sit down with Joseph to write a Welcome to Night Vale novel, you get to explore a character that's already been fleshed out, and I get to do a little bit more with them. When Janina and I wrote this book, we'd been doing Within the Wires for 4 years at the time when we started, and it was it's still a brand new thing. Like, some of the details of the Great Reckoning and some of the specific historical things, but like every character in this book is brand new. You know, the whole entire storyline is there's nothing.
Ask about one of them. I didn't know if I was allowed to. The one who they keep saying in the footnotes, we aren't sure if they're referencing this person, but if they are, that doesn't sound anything like her, which I just love.
Yes.
Especially because your narrator never gives her last name. So like, we think that she means this, but that can't be right because she would never.
Well, I love that. Like, we're reading a book with two unreliable narrators, and you can trust each of them only to a certain extent. And
yeah, as far as you can throw them, I would say.
Yeah.
And I'm weak. I can't throw anybody.
Yeah, no, me too.
I have a bad back.
I'm like, I've got no upper body strength, so that just tells you what we need to know about these narrators.
I can throw my kids like from this onto a bed, and that's that's a bad idea. They're small. I can put my dog onto a couch, but I wouldn't throw him because he's delicate.
Yeah.
You'd be like totally thrown off. So is that character, who shall remain unnamed, does she factor into any place else, or was this her first introduction?
This is her first appearance.
Yeah. There might.
See, I was wondering if like those would be people that if I had listened to the other stuff beforehand, I'd be like, oh, with who this character is. If that was,
I know. I kind of thought that maybe one of the characters that ends up having not a great ending. I didn't know if like that character. I'm not even going to like gender them because I want it to be so spoilerless. And well,
there are at least three that come
Allison,
to my mind.
I feel like you know who I'm talking about.
Well, is it the one you mentioned earlier? That like, what happened to so and so? Oh, that one. Okay, yeah, I know who you're going.
Yeah. So like, we didn't know if any of these were like Easter eggs for for the people who like listen to the podcast,
They're
and we just didn't.
Fans instead of newbies.
Or are they going to maybe come back in a podcast season that could center around them?
Not if they didn't enter a good. Well, I guess it could be.
A lot of it is just like referential. You know, like it'll
Yeah.
be, there's probably a couple of not remembering every footnote, but there's probably a couple moments in footnotes in this novel that maybe reference some political figure that gets referenced in a season, but it's never like there's no major character of any of any of the podcast seasons and mentioned here. There's an institute, that's not a spoiler because it's mentioned in the intro, but there is an institute that plays a big part in this book that is kind of is the setting of season 1 of Within the Wires, the podcast. But it's again like there's those connections there, but characters, no, we didn't. Yeah, we really, it's really fun to be able to just totally hit the reset button every time we start a new story.
Yeah. So we tend to keep characters even throughout the podcast and in the book, characters. If a character is going to make multiple appearances, the vast majority of the time, they're not going to be central in both of those. Like they'll be mentioned in a throwaway line,
just
rather
to kind of
than
connect it.
Yeah. Partly because everything is always set in vastly different time periods. You know,
Right.
like season 1 was in the 80s, and then we went to sort of through from the 60s to the 70s, and then 50s and 90s. I think season 4 was 90s.
Sure.
And then obviously
you can just powerfully just be like season 4 was the 90s. Oh no.
Yeah.
And then obviously
to correct you yet, so you're fine.
Yeah. The book obviously starts right at the beginning of the 20th century. So they're not inhabiting each other's worlds so much. They're trotting through on occasion.
Right, and you've created a world that spans continents and decades, so you can totally do that because you're like, we could do something that's set in this country over here or the former this country over here in this decade, and nothing we've touched has ever gotten anywhere near it, and you could do a whole new story there and not worry about too much other than like stay with the same tenets that you set forward, but not worry about like, oh no, we have to worry about where Miriam is right now. She's fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She's fine. She's writing her book. She's in like wherever she is. She's writing
another deeply boring book.
Her 6th deeply boring book, which I loved. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I Miriam?
Her books were academic. Yours are not.
Mine are not. Mine have no academic qualifications. Jeffrey, Janina, I just want to thank you both, and obviously thank you, Allison, for being here. We are out of time. So I want to thank.
Delight. It was an absolute
delight. I don't feel like we've been called a delight. I think we've been called like funny and the kind of crazy that's good. You're like, I'll take that as a compliment, but a delight. Oh, that
I have
like
a bachelor's degree. I am well
using all those fancy words.
I know. I'm like, me too, but mine was in theater.
No, I'm super qualified. Mine was in journalism, and I've never used it.
Hey, you're on a microphone right now. You are completely using that.
You're using it.
So.
You're using it. You're a journalist. You've listened to NPR.
That's right. I've listened to This American Life. I know who Tori Malatia is.
Perfect. Those are the qualifications. So thank you both for being here. Thank you, Allison. Thank you to everybody at the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Thank you to Pam Stack, our executive producer, Roman Saratin, our producer. Join us next week on Wednesday when we have, I'm going to mispronounce her last name, Tara Laskowski, and she'll be here talking about her new book, The Mother Next Door. Thank you all, and